Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics. I'm Sudan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. On this week's program, dozens have been killed in the town of Laascaanood in the Seoul region of Somalia as Somaliland security forces use lethal force against protesters that demand self-determination for the Seoul, Sanag and Ain regions, which have been under the control of Somaliland since 2007. Dozens of assassinations have taken place, with rarely any being solved. The most recent death of rising politician HORUFADHI sparked an uproar which caused major protests across the city. Why now? This is a topic on the program today. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you can find other exclusive programs such as Mahah and the African Weekly Roundup, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sudan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Now, let's get straight into the news. Laascaanood and the regions of Seoul, Sanag and Ain are home to the legendary Darawish, an anti-colonial warriors of Somalia. The flag of the self-declared Khatam state of Somalia contains a Darawish soldier on his horse. However, much like the Darawish state in the 1900s did not receive recognition, the Khatam state of Somalia is yet to receive recognition from the federal government in Mogadishu. For over a century now, it seems as though the people of the SSC region have been stuck in a cycle of continuous struggle for their right to self-determine their future. From the British Empire to the current self-declared Somaliland government in Hargeisa, the people in the region continue to face oppression. Recent events in the administrative capital of Seoul, Laascaanood, have sparked another uproar in the town, which resulted in civilians protesting and waving the flag of the Somali Republic, as well as Khatam state. Security forces of the Somaliland separatist government in the town used lethal force to disperse the crowds, as dozens were killed and more arrested with telecommunications and internet services shut off. Unrest in the city continues on for its second week as Hargeisa sent reinforcement from other regions of the self-declared Somaliland region in northern Somalia to continue the suppression of protesters. So what has caused the unrest? To understand the unrest, we have to look at the continued assassinations. There have been reports of hundreds of assassinations in the town of Laascaanood since 2009 according to local statistics, with many of the murders remaining unaccounted for. Many of those killed in these assassinations tend to be civil leaders, politicians and elders. Let's take a look at high-profile assassinations that have taken place in the region since 2020 alone. In March 2020, the head of the courts in Seoul, Hassan Sheikh, was killed when a bomb was attached to his vehicle. Within the same month, the head of intelligence in Seoul was killed while traveling home. In July 2021, the head of the Seoul Electoral Commission, Abdullahi Labagole, was killed as he entered his home. The following month, local MP and chairman of the Wadani party in Seoul, Abdurrazak Ahmed Elmi, was killed as he entered his home in Laascaanood. In March 2022, another local MP, Zakaria Garabyere, survived an assassination attempt, sustaining injuries. Within the same month again, the chairman of the Seoul Contractual Committee, Mohammed Abdullahi Farah, was killed by unidentified gunmen in the center of Laascaanood. In May 2022, former mayor of Laascaanood Abdulaziz Hussein narrowly escaped an attempt on his life, and only a few weeks later, former local MP and chairman of Urid party in Seoul, Mohammed Aflahar, was killed as he entered his home. The most recent, in December 2022, an official in the Seoul Wadani party, Abdulfatah Abdullah Hadrawi, was murdered in the city, which ultimately sparked the unrest in recent days. The extensive list of murders and attempted murders remain unaccounted for, as the Somaliland authorities are yet to sentence anyone for the crimes. Indeed, there have been dozens of assassinations at Laascaanood before 2020, between 2010 and 2019, for example. Let's look at a couple of killings in 2010, for example. In January 16th, Farah Abdi Suhufi was killed. He was a senior member of the Laascaanood administrative officials or local council, and this remains unsolved. On the 26th of June 2010, Chief Hussein Dalqaf Gadase was killed, which remains unsolved. For example, on the 8th of July 2010, Saleban Dere, a respected elder that built multiple educational facilities in the town, was also killed, and this remains unsolved. These are just some of the killings in 2010, let alone the dozens of killings that occurred in all the other years that surpassed 2010. So why are many blaming the separatist government in Hargeisa? The reality is that once Somaliland overran the region in 2010, it declared itself the ruling authority in the region and pledged to provide security to citizens under this new administration. Authorities in Hargeisa deployed dozens of police and military units to the region to consolidate power and deter Puntland from attempting to regain control of the region. Nevertheless, despite the large amounts of security personnel deployed by Hargeisa, assassinations in the town began to skyrocket as various individuals were targeted, from Laascaanood councillors to local MPs violence to civilians. Despite calls from clan elders and civil society in the region calling for Somaliland regime in Hargeisa to conduct investigations and arrest contract killers behind these widespread deaths, there have been very little success from security forces. Ultimately, many in the SSC region believe the Somaliland authorities are at the minimum turning a blind eye to the deaths and unrest in the town. Many have questioned how security forces that are in every corner of Laascaanood and the Seoul region are unable to identify a roaming gang shooting and killing public figures across the administrative capital. So, what has Hargeisa said about the assassinations? Speaking to the media this afternoon, President of the separatist Somaliland government, Musa Bihi, claimed that only 40 individuals were killed in Laascaanood between 2009 and 2022. Of the 40, 32 are currently cases being handled by authorities, with 26 seeing individuals being sentenced, he said. If we look at it in another way, said President Bihi, 24 officials that were affiliated or supported the separatist Somaliland government were killed. He went on further to claim that 16 of the individuals killed were innocent civilians that were killed for, and I quote, supporting the independence of Somaliland. Now, irrespective of which side you are on, the reality is that Somaliland's occupation of the region since 2007 has failed to maintain any form of security or stability. The residents of the region see Hargeisa as an oppressive regime that is hell-bent on forcing the SSC region to secede from the rest of the Somali Republic. Additionally, many in the region see Hargeisa as funding and supporting the killings that are ongoing under Somaliland's watch. There is a mistrust between the people of the SSC and Hargeisa, which has only been embedded deep into the hearts and minds of locals following the recent protests and killings by security forces. So, what is actually happening in Laascaanood right now? Well, on the 26th of December 2022, rising politician Unrest Abdullahi Hadrawi was shot and killed as he left a masjid in the city following evening prayers, joining the many local officials that have been killed by unidentified assassins over the last decade. Hadrawi was an official in the opposition Wadani party in the Seoul region, and Hadrawi was on a list of Somaliland Regional House of Representative candidates for the Wadani party, according to the party's presidential candidate Abdurrahman Ero. The opposition blamed the Bihi government of having played a role. Now conversely, Bihi blamed the killing on, and I quote, enemies of Somaliland. The latest killing sparked protests in the city, which resulted in dozens of people ranging from children to elderly folk coming out onto the streets to protest the continued unlawful killing of not just Hadrawi but dozens of people before him. Many were infuriated by the nonchalant response from the Somaliland authorities to the deteriorating security situation. Aside from the killings, many young Somalis in the city showcased the Awale flag, the flag of the Somali Republic, and a symbol that represents Somali unity. For these Somalis, the pride for Somali unity and prosperity has been at the forefront of their continued agenda as they protest against the separatist government that advocates for separation of what is left of the Somali nation, a plight that has been ongoing since the first British incursion in the 1880s. Nevertheless, it will be the brutal response from the Somaliland authorities themselves which will result in the uproar we are witnessing in the city today. Security forces loyal to Hargeisa began firing live bullets at unarmed civilians that were throwing rocks, resulting in many being injured and some being killed. Within the first 32 hours, Somaliland security forces killed 5 people in the city indiscriminately. Since then, British-trained Rapid Response Units, or RRU, and other Somaliland security forces were deployed to the town to quell protesters, which resulted in many more innocent, unarmed civilians being killed by these soldiers. One of the most heinous killings was the assassination of Sheikh Bida Farah Alim, who was killed as he spoke to masses at a masjid in Laascaanood by Somaliland security forces. Within days, the Somaliland president ordered all telecommunications and electricity companies to cease services in the city, resulting in major disruption for many residents. Somaliland security forces raided the headquarters of Telesom and other telecommunication companies in the city around the same time. Now, many residents rely on internet banking and money transfer services to purchase basic necessities. Hospitals are unable to provide basic care as electricity and internet has been cut off in the city. In fact, reports are emerging that indicate most of the victims that have been killed have not even been buried yet and remain in the morgue. There have been dozens of arrests, with current reports indicating nearly 180 people are currently held due to the protests in Laascaanood or relations to it. Some individuals were students in Hargeisa that spoke out against violence in Laascaanood by security forces, and the Hargeisa regime is using any method possible to silence dissent outside of Laascaanood. Since the unrest, major businesses and other establishments have been closed. However, there have been reports of Somaliland forces demanding local businesses to open to no avail. Unconfirmed reports indicate 2 business owners were killed by Somaliland forces during these altercations. So, what do the people of Laascaanood actually want? Now, in response to recent clashes and oppressive measures by Somaliland, a number of officials in the Somaliland government from the Sool region have resigned in protest to recent actions, including local officials and security personnel. We've also seen the Laascaanood football team withdraw from local tournaments in Hargeisa in protest of the extrajudicial killings by Somaliland forces in Laascaanood. Within days of the violence, religious and clan elders met across masjids in Laascaanood and urged locals to defend themselves against the brute force of the Somaliland government, which had killed dozens already at this point. Now, in response, Somaliland forces raided masjids, which resulted in the deaths of a number of people, including Sheikh Alim, as I previously mentioned. Now, all 13 regional elders, including the previously pro-Somaliland Garad Jama' Garad Ismail, have agreed that Somaliland forces must leave the town and region for there to be any talks of peace. Now, speaking to HORUFADHI media, spokesman for the Laascaanood protesters, Adan Jama Ogle, said that the only request protesters have is for Somaliland forces and officials to leave the city immediately. So what's next? Now, Puntland State President Saeed Abdullahi Deni recently spoke at a press conference in Garowe, in which he declared that Puntland was ready to support the people of the SSC against what he described as Somaliland aggression. Then he continued that his federal member state was both ready politically and militarily to defend the region. Now, in response, Somaliland President Musa Bihi taunted the Puntland leader, implying that whatever happens as a result of the conflict would be detrimental to Puntland. Now, Bihi further elaborated that the separatist Somaliland government in Hargeisa was ready to defend its borders at any time. Now, the heated exchange signaled renewed increased tensions between the two regional states, which could result in more clashes and more deaths. So what about Khartoum State? Now, to the dismay of the SSC people, then he declared the regions of the SSC part of the Puntland state, rather than it being an independent region called Khartoum. Now, Khartoum State has been vehemently campaigning for recognition from the federal government to Somalia to become a federal member state with equivalent status to Puntland and other federal member states of Somalia. Now, recent conferences held in Mogadishu and Jijjiga have called for support and recognition. However, the federal government in Mogadishu has remained silent on the matter. Now, both Puntland and Somaliland do not want to see the region declared a federal member state and work together to ensure that remains the case. Nevertheless, the regional states both claim jurisdiction over the region of Sool, Senag and Ain, having fought numerous battles over the regions in recent decades. Now, it seems as though there are only two main avenues open for the people of the SSC. One is Mogadishu recognizes Khartoum as a FMS, or a federal member state. This is the least likely outcome, as Villa Somalia does not want to enrage both Garowe and Hargeisa. And the second, which is the most likely step forward for the people of the SSC, is self-determination via any means necessary, which includes taking up arms against any physical oppression that they might be facing. However, of course, violence is not always the correct answer, and peaceful dialogue should be the best avenue forward. However, of course, if there cannot be peaceful dialogue and there are oppressions and violations of basic human rights against the people of the region, then surely the people of the region have a right to protect those basic civil liberties and rights. Ultimately, the fate of Sool, Senag and Ain continues to be blocked by hurdles set by only fellow Somalis. The future of the SSC region now solely lies in the hands of its people.